Hello, I'm Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor of the Supreme Court of Ohio.
And I'm Justice Melody Stewart.
The African American quest for equality in the state of Ohio is a long story that starts with early settlements, the Ordinance of 1787, and an infant nation's promise of freedom and new beginnings.
It is a story rich in hope and heroic dreams.
It is a story of promises, yet a tale of promises made selectively and promises deferred for so many. There are triumphs in this narrative, but they are born of struggle. Against the odds, there are success stories across many generations of Black Ohioans. And yet, the work of full equality for all citizens in our state remains unfinished in our day.
The story of African American rights and equality in Ohio is a story without a closing chapter. We still have a lot of work to do. This series of short documentaries is intended to educate all citizens of our state about the battles for racial justice that have marked our shared history.
Our aim is to ensure that the next chapters unfold intelligently and fairly, with a keen knowledge and acknowledgement of our past.
We invite you to learn about a few Ohioans before us who started writing the important chapters of our history, and to think about the kind of Ohio we wish to create for ourselves today and for those who come after us.
Americans often think of racial segregation as a Southern institution, a consequence of the culture of slavery. But laws that discriminate against Black people have existed all over our country, including here in Ohio. Ohio was carved out of the Northwest Territory. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787 created this new and vast expanse of America and explicitly outlawed slavery within its borders. So, Ohio became one of the first states in the Union where slavery was never legal. However, racial discrimination was still part of Ohio's legal system from the very beginning. Ohio had just barely had its first birthday when the General Assembly began passing legislation, first in 1804, then in 1807, specifically designed to discourage Black people from moving to the state and to discriminate against those of African descent already living here. Some of these statutes provided that Black people could not settle in Ohio unless they could prove they were not enslaved. A Black person would have to present an official court certificate of freedom attested by a clerk of courts in order to live in Ohio. No Black man or woman could be hired for any job in Ohio unless that person could present evidence that he or she was not enslaved elsewhere. Other statutes decreed that Black people could not testify in a court of law against a white person. Black children were excluded from public schools, and Black people living in Ohio were not allowed to vote. Still more statutes prohibited any free person, white or Black, from harboring enslaved Black people who escaped to Ohio. Enslaved people who escaped to Ohio, if captured, would be returned to their owners. Taken together, this series of statutes came to be referred to in Ohio as the Black Laws. Official discrimination in the law, also known as Black Codes, swept across America. For the most part, the public, the legislature, and the courts of Ohio approved of the Black Laws. Ohio may have prohibited slavery in its founding, but by passing and enforcing these laws, Ohio accommodated and supported slavery in other states. Perception started to change in the 1840s, however, and some of the statutes that made up the Black Laws were changed or repealed. Then came the Civil War in 1861. More than 300,000 Ohioans served in the Union Army, the third largest number of any state. More than 35,000 Ohioans died to defeat slavery and preserve the Union. Yet still, even after the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 and the defeat of the South in the Civil War, portions of Ohio's Black Laws remained. These included the parts that allowed for the segregation of Ohio schools and prohibited Black and white people from marrying one another. A great force of change came about just after the Civil War. It was the right to vote. After the war, the 15th Amendment to the United States Constitution was ratified in 1870, giving black men the right to vote for the first time. In Ohio, George Washington Williams, John P. Greene, Jeremiah Brown, and Benjamin Arnett were some of the first black men elected to the General Assembly. Benjamin Arnett was born in Brownsville, Pennsylvania in 1838. In his youth, Arnett was educated in a one-room schoolhouse, worked in hotels, and aboard riverboats. At the age of 20, a malignant tumor forced Arnett to have his leg amputated. Arnett rose through the ranks of education, becoming the only black teacher in Fayette, Pennsylvania, and worked as a school principal in Washington, D.C. during the height of the Civil War. In the 1860s and 70s, religion called to Arnett. He began preaching in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, eventually becoming the pastor of Allen Temple in Cincinnati. At the same time, Arnett was heavily involved with civil rights and politics. In 1864, Arnett joined the National Equal Rights League, led by Frederick Douglass. In 1885, Arnett was elected to represent Greene County in the Ohio General Assembly. After his election, Arnett immediately set his sights on the black laws. It's important to remember that plenty of activists and politicians worked toward abolishing the black laws during this time. But it was the leadership of Benjamin Arnett that finally forced the General Assembly to confront this evidence of Ohio's racist legacy. Early in 1886, Benjamin Arnett introduced his bill to eradicate the last of the black laws. On March 10th, he stood in the Ohio House of Representatives and delivered a rousing and personal speech on the evils of segregation.
Members would be astonished when I tell them that I've traveled in this free country for 20 hours without anything to eat. Other passengers of a lighter hue had breakfast, dinner, and supper. In traveling, we are thrown in Jim Crow cars, denied the privilege of buying berth in the sleeping coach. This monster cast stands at the doors of the theaters and skating rinks, locks the doors of the pews in our fashionable churches, closes the mouths of some of the ministers in their pulpits, which prevents the man of color from breaking the bread of life to his fellow men. This foe of my race stands at the schoolhouse door and separates the children by reason of color, and denies to those who have a visible admixture of African blood in them the blessings of a graded school and equal privileges. We propose by this bill to knock the monster in the head and deprive him of his occupation.
The black-owned Cleveland Gazette would later call Arnett's speech the finest delivered in the House and the grandest speech of his life. The House of Representatives passed the Arnett bill by a vote of 62 to 28, but the Ohio Senate adjourned before it could vote on the bill. So Arnett and black activists all over Ohio had to wait 11 excruciating months for the day when the black laws would finally be overthrown. That day came on February 17, 1887, when the Ohio Senate passed the Arnett bill by a vote of 24 to 7. But there remained white resistance to the end of segregation in the state. An example of this resistance is what happened in Xenia. The school board there created what the Cleveland Gazette called in 1888 the zigzag line. Quote, so skillfully run that all of the colored children are thrown into one district and all of the white children into another, unquote. The Arnett bill certainly did not end discrimination in Ohio once and for all. Benjamin Arnett left the Ohio General Assembly in 1887, but remained influential in state and national politics. At the 1888 Centennial Jubilee of Freedom in Columbus, Arnett delivered the keynote oration in which he celebrated the advances in civil rights since the end of the Civil War, but warned that the conflict of the future would not be
to secure political, civil, or social rights, for we have them now. The only thing that is needed is to have the privilege of exercising them as free men in all parts of the land, in every state of the Union. There is nothing so universal as the love of freedom, mind, soul, and body freedom. All the battles of the world have been fought to secure one or the other of them.
Benjamin Arnett was just one of many Ohioans over the decades who have employed the rule of law to effect change, address racial injustice, and ensure equality under the law. He is also one of so many Ohioans who has not received rightful recognition for his efforts to make Ohio the land of opportunity for people of all races.